This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 83 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to take a close look at an innovation class, a model for self-directed, real-world learning right inside a regular public school. I hear it all the time. The world is changing and schools need to change. Lots of us recognize that we should no longer be relying on the old model where we just dump information into our students' brains and they regurgitate it back. The world we live in today requires more of people: problem-solving skills, creativity, collaboration, the ability to innovate, iterate, and design solutions for problems that don't even exist yet. The way we do school now just doesn't prepare kids the way it should. It's a good message, a true message, but too often that message leaves us hanging. We nod along, we agree that things need to be different, but then we go back to doing more or less what we've always done, because we aren't exactly sure how to change school. Luckily, more people are starting to figure it out, and part of my mission here is to share their ideas with you. In episode 62, I interviewed the teachers at the Apollo School, an innovative program blending history, English, and art that's run inside a public high school in Pennsylvania. In episode 73, we talked to Stephen Ritz, whose incredible urban gardening projects transformed his Bronx classroom and the lives of his students. And in episode 38, we heard about an underused middle school library in Ohio that completely reconfigured its space into a collaborative, flexible, technology-rich learning hub that now stays busy all the time. In this episode, we'll look at another model for 21st century learning, a year-long elective offered in an Indiana high school where students design and execute their own passion-driven projects. The course is called Innovation and Open Source Learning, and the teacher's name is Don Wettrick, who is my guest today. In our conversation, Don tells me about how he first launched the course in his school, how he structures it to build in both accountability and freedom for his students, and how he's changed and improved the program over the past 6 years. He also drops several 80s pop references, which I'm learning is just a thing Don does. He says we're totally bros now, so I think I'm allowed to say stuff like that. My hope is that when you hear about this innovation class, you'll start to think about how you might implement something similar in your own school. If not a fully fledged class, then maybe an after-school club or a pull-out program, a way to differentiate for some students, but something. After you listen to this, head over to Don's website, which is startedupinnovation.com. where you'll find links to his podcast, his Facebook page, and his YouTube channel, where he shares his daily video logs that document his students' work in class. You'll also find links to his website if you go to cultofpedagogy.com, click on podcast, and go to episode 83. Before we get started, I'd like to thank my sponsor, My Simple Show. My Simple Show is this really cool online tool that allows you to create your own animated videos for free. It's so easy and fast. You just write your script or upload your PowerPoint, let My Simple Show find images to match it, then fine-tune it until it's done. It would be perfect for flipping your classroom or having students create their own videos. MySimpleShow.com now offers premium options and special plans just for educators. Try your first video for free and inquire about the special education and classroom offers at MySimpleShow.com. I would also like to thank you for the reviews you've left on iTunes and for recommending this podcast to your colleagues. After doing 83 episodes, I think there really is something for everyone here, and I would love for more teachers to be listening. If you'd like to support the work I'm doing here, please recommend the podcast to a friend and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes. It really does make a difference. Now let's learn about teaching innovation with Don Wettrick. I saw you do a Facebook Live just the other day, and you were talking about how there's so many of us in education spaces saying that kids need to be more innovative and we need to stop the drill and kill, and it needs to be student-led, but not a lot of people are actually doing it. and that we need to start doing stuff. And your answer to that, if I'm remembering the Facebook Live correctly, is that, and I do think this is the problem, is that nobody's got a real model for how to do this. And you were saying if you need to have innovation classes in your
Yeah.
schools, and you've done this now for a couple of years. So the purpose of
6.
us talking today is 6 years. Okay. So that's great because it's really well developed now. Is for us to just talk about what is this innovation class? What is it? What is so great about it? And how does one get something like this started in their school?
Yeah. Um, Man, there's a lot to unpack there. Can I
I know.
start from the beginning?
Absolutely. Yeah.
My beginning was several years ago. I mean, what now? 7, I think. Just an email that said "Watch this," and it was a link. I've actually saved this email because it's so important to me, and it was a link to Daniel Pink's TED Talk. And
Uh-huh.
I'm sure a lot of your audience has seen it. If they haven't, right after this podcast, make sure you go to YouTube or TED.com and look up Dan Pink Puzzles of Motivation. And so he goes on to tell people about the 20% time at Atlassian, and then later and most famously Google. And then I was thinking, wow, what he said rang true, because he kind of made the point that people don't work for money, they work for mastery, autonomy, purpose. And I was like, okay, so what do we work for in school? Grade. That is our unit of monetization. So
Right.
long story made short, I started doing a Genius Hour before there was a term, Genius Hour, which, by the way, caveat, I don't really like the term
Yeah.
Genius Hour. So,
Okay.
side note.
Why?
Anyway,
Yeah.
um,
But
because the term genius is so, no, it's a measurement of a lot of times like testing ability, and well, anyway, I don't want to get into
yeah,
semantics. I
it's
just
too
don't like the term.
loaded though. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So
Right.
anyway, so I try it, and it was terrible. Matter of fact, the funny part of it is that I too would call it 20% time because it worked for 20% of my kids.
Mm.
Because there was all this anticipation, and like, this is going to be great. And I was like, okay, what do you guys want to work on? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, you guys have talked to me about wanting to be free and work on things you're passionate about. What are you passionate about? How am I going to get an A on this?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and so I'm not going to lie to you. Like, when people are like, oh, Genius Hour is great, it's a freaking nightmare at first. If you're in high school, okay. So if you're in high
Okay.
school, if you're in middle school, it's a little bit. It's still difficult. In like the first, second, third grade, it's. I hate to use the word easy. It's a lot simplified, because the kids then still have passion and enthusiasm and a love of learning, and we haven't beaten it out of them yet. Asterisk,
Right.
yet.
Right.
So anyway, we had just enough success with those, which, ironically enough, the 20% of the kids that did well were, I'm using my air quotes, bad students.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to say that they're like, seriously, you're going to let me work on this? Yeah. All right, get on my way.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the 4.3 GPA kid was like, okay, what do you want me to do? No, no, no. What do you want to do? I don't know.
Yes.
And I still run into that.
I've heard this story
So
before. I've heard this from other teachers too, that it's those the ones
it's
who have worked
universal.
well in that system, they kind of freak out because they're set to press and play, and it's like, wait a second, what are you
Yeah.
doing? Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think that's the cruel joke that we're playing. Good students, I've had some that have come and went, and good students, there's not a lot of availability for them in the job force. Hey, I can memorize stuff and tell you what you want to
Right.
hear.
Right.
So
Yep.
the kids that like to disrupt, the kids that like to work independently, the kids that like to chase an idea down till it's failing, and then they learn how to react from it. Like, there's a huge future in that. So little by little, I've just picked up things along the way, and probably my favorite thing to recount was my dad's wise words several years ago. I wrote this in my books. My favorite thing to talk about. When I was in my mom and dad paid for all of my education.
Mm-hmm.
My mom and dad were my mom wasn't in education, but she was a stay-at-home mom, but that makes her in education. And so is my sister, and so is my dad. And so for the first 3 years of my being out of college, I worked for a think tank in Indianapolis. And I just didn't like it, and I wanted to be like my dad. And long story made short, I said, Dad, I'm not asking for money, but I think I'm going to go back and be, get my teaching degree. And he's like, he's like, that's fine. He's like, just promise me one thing, that you can teach for the next 20 years, but promise me you won't teach 1 year 20 times. And that's been innovation to me.
Yeah.
So when I started this wacky class, which there's a whole long story on how I got that approved, but like each year is different.
Yeah.
And the students know that, like, they're not working for me. I'm busting my butt working for them.
Yeah.
They, every 9 weeks, tell me what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
They tell me what's motivating them. You want to talk about personalized learning? This is the pinnacle. And that's why I think and sorry if I was it was right at the fall break, so I was getting a little chippy. And I was like I'm tired of making apologies for it.
Right.
The 20% time Genius Hour movement is the greatest thing in education. Period. Exclamation point. Underlined, italicized. Because if we don't give our time for students to do this kind of thing, and don't get me wrong, you cannot be innovative if you haven't hit the standards. Like, if you don't know how to read, write, if you don't understand scientific method, you're not going to be innovative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I'm not throwing out everything. I'm not.
Right.
But could you give me 20% of the time? And I wrote a blog on this. Like, people are like, well, 20% time what? I'm like, I'm glad you asked. I break it down to a have to, should, and want to. So the 50% of your time is things you have to do.
Okay.
I get it. Cover your standards,
Right.
man.
Right.
They're awesome. I mean, a lot of standards are there for a reason. They're good. The 30% of those is things that you should do.
Right.
Like PBL, like backing up some of the things, the skill and drill stuff that you had to suffer through. 30% of that time now should be things you should do. That leaves 20% time for you to want to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a good math teacher and you've taken them through some really great simulations, now they may want to use what they've been armed with to do things that they're passionate about. Or, like, not even passionate, it's a loaded word as well.
Yeah.
But, like, what they're compelled to do, what they're like, dude, wouldn't it be cool if?
Right.
That's why I love it so much. Just 20% of my time, man. That's it. And
Right.
this is also why, sorry, and I'll shut up. This is so hard for me to not.
No, go. You've got the passion.
Like, in high
Go.
school,
Yeah.
I okay, no. So, like at the high school level, okay? And this is what I work with most schools. At the elementary level, like, this is easy. Like 20 minutes on a Friday. Well, actually, like, I always let the students dictate to me what the calendar is. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times elementary students will either pick Monday or Friday. They either want to start their week off with awesomeness or end it. In the middle school, this is the thing I love. If you're teamed, and a lot of middle schools are, because the battle cry is, when am I going to fit this into my schedule? I've got to cover standards. I'm like, could you do it once a month? Could you give me 30 minutes a month? And they're like, well, what would that do? Because on this week, it's science. And next week, it's social studies. And the next week, and so you share the responsibility. And I've worked with my schools that this is kind of a bonding thing with the team as well, the teachers. They start asking them about their projects.
Got it.
And then at the high school level, this is my humble opinion, I don't like Genius Hour in high school.
Okay.
It's got to be its own elective.
Okay. This is an elective class. So the class that you developed in your high school, it was a separate elective.
Yeah.
And it's called innovation class.
Innovation and open source learning. The class is about 7, maybe 8 weeks long, and that's the innovation side. I teach those 6 to 7, 8 weeks.
Okay.
The rest of the year is open source learning, which is, if the kids know how to, like, how much do I know of coding good Android apps? I don't. Shocker.
Right.
If the kid wants to do an event that will make a pet shelter a no-kill pet shelter, how much do I know about that? Not a lot.
Right.
But I know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, like, I work for them. So some of our students are like, hey, Mr. Wettrick, I need to find a guy who specializes in blank.
Yes.
And so I'll try to help dig that up. I prefer they find them, but they have that time to collaborate with people, and that's why it's called open source learning. They start finding other sources of information other than, like, I'm pretty dumb in a lot of areas. And so what I do then is I set them up with, how to create a great social media profile where people want to follow you, that they're shocked and amazed that somebody at 16 years old is going to be tackling great problems. Number two, you know how to set smart goals.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to state something and then back it up. And then
Mm-hmm.
three, like everybody this year, and I hate to make demands too many, but everybody this year either has to have a blog, a podcast, or a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, to me, that makes
Because
perfect
if
sense
you're
because you need something that is public facing, so people get to know what your deal is and what your yeah. Well, I'm actually
yeah,
paraphrasing it for
and
you.
they're held
Uh-huh.
accountable. If they make their things like, hey, I'm going to do this, and this is not me ripping on kids. This is most adults I know. I call it the lottery ticket
Mm-hmm.
mentality. You know what I'm going to do? You know what I'm going to do when I win this lottery? I'm going to buy my mom a car. Okay, you're not because you're not going to win. So when people tell, or actually, one of my students said, this class is the difference between a New Year's resolution and doing it,
Yeah.
and it's my job that you
Yeah.
do it. So the rest of the year, and they grade themselves. They turn in reflections every 2 weeks. And we have these little circuit breakers, right? Or in Silicon Valley, they call them the pivots, right?
Uh-huh.
So every 2 weeks, they're telling me what works or what
Right.
doesn't. And I'm just asking them, like, what did you accomplish? And some kids were like, yeah, I did some things. And I talked to a guy. And I'll just look at him and go, uh-huh. So what do you think you got this week? Well, I mean, I was really busy. Or sometimes they're like, hey, I worked my butt off and nothing worked.
Right.
Awesome. Because in the beginning of class, like, do I fail this week because it didn't work? I'm like, oh my gosh, no, you learned more about what didn't work this week. This is awesome.
Okay. I want to roll back a little bit. So the first 6-7 weeks of this course is much more sort of direct instruction, and I'm assuming at this point you're sort of equipping them to handle the remainder of the school year when it's the open source learning.
Yep.
So can you give me a couple of bullet points on what you're actually covering? I think you sort of hinted at a lot of this stuff already, but what are the main things you
Yeah.
want to hit during those first couple of weeks?
Number one, how to think differently and how to think for yourself. So, okay, like we have a couple of TED Talks that we watch. We'll play a couple of games. Like Disruptus is such an easy, fun game that I think that gets a lot of things going.
Disruptus?
Yeah,
I don't know
it's
this
on
game.
Amazon.
Okay.
At this point, I really think I should get a cut of her sales because I've sold a lot of games. I'll give them like short excerpts from books. I have them listen to podcasts. Like we read like 11 pages from Seth Godin's Lynchpin,
Uh-huh.
and I'll show them clips from like what was Tony Wagner's film called Most Likely to Succeed. And I'll show them all the urgency, like all this media on school should change, school should change, school should change. And then most notably, I even said, I'm like, what do you not like about school? And so I let them tell me all the things that the class is by saying what you don't like. Because instinctively, what we always say is, when am I going to use this in real life? We need to make it relevant. When do I have time to like have things that I'm passionate about? Check, check,
Right.
check.
You have it now.
Like this class is the ultimate mirror to your face. Right. So when everybody's complaining, and that's one of the funny things about our class, like I turn my kids into doers, and I hate to say this, but it starts affecting their relationships with other people because they're like, oh, just shut up and do it.
Yeah.
They see everybody else on social media and, oh, everything sucks and everything is terrible. And they're like, what are you doing about it? Seriously, like, what are you doing
Oh
about it?
no.
And so they turn into doers. No, they're amazing, but I'm serious. And the other thing that I hate, and I'm very upfront with the parents. I have my own extra back to school night. Like sometimes grades go down
Yeah.
because I always compare them to Marines. Like little guys get big, but like really big guys get leaner, and eventually a Marine looks like a Marine.
Mm-hmm.
So my DNF students start to get C's because they're like, look, I want to stick around. So their GPA goes up a little bit. But straight A students start looking at some of this and like, okay, they used to dedicate 2 hours a night to homework, but like in some ways I hate it, in other ways I don't at all. But their grades slip a little bit because they're like, I'm working on my business. I'm about to launch. Or I've got this event that I'm throwing in 2 weeks, and there's no way in heck I have
So
time
it's
for
that
this.
their grade
So-
doesn't go down sort of in your class. It's that they're starting to let their other coursework drop because they're just that excited about what they're doing in your class.
Opportunity cost
Right,
101.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you're teaching them how to think differently. There's a lot of sort of inspiring stuff going on in those first weeks, helping them understand even the point of this course at all. Are there any sort of more
Hmm.
beyond the inspiration, hands-on practical types of things
Yeah,
that
I
they're
mean,
learning too? Okay, like
yeah,
what?
absolutely. Like some of our methodologies, we learn Roth IRA,
Huh.
which other than a tax advantage savings vehicle, Roth IRA is our methodology of how we work. It's our 2 week cycle. So Roth is an acronym. So realization, open discussion, tussling, and homogeneous grouping. So a lot of times, as I'm sending them podcasts to listen to, things to, whatever, I'm going to ask them to just go observe things. And so they'll get this realization like, oh my gosh. And then when they do, I'm asking them to jot it down. And that goes to the O, which is open discussion.
Okay.
That open discussion, like all of a sudden, like what you thought may have been a good idea, you say out loud. And then the rest of the group, it's their turn to fight, which is
Uh-huh.
tussle. So sometimes, like every other Monday, we have the Roth part. So in this open discussion, somebody's like, I've got this great idea. And then somebody's like, no, it's not. Did you think about this?
Right.
And then oftentimes when the really artsy kid meets the tech kid, or when
Yeah. Yeah.
opposites meet, um, they take 2 steps forward, I take 2 steps back. We get together because, sorry, Paul Abdul. Come
I
on,
know. I
Jennifer,
should.
you didn't.
Sorry. I'm
All
so
right,
sorry.
play into an empty room. So opposites attract, and that leads to homogeneous, which is the H, which is homogeneous grouping, not ability grouping, but they like group themselves. I don't want them to pick their
Uh-huh.
friends. Again, sorry about the Paul Abdul
No, I
reference.
loved
Next
it.
time it'll be
Thank you.
Prince.
I would have gotten the Prince one.
Prince or maybe greater. Okay, well, just warning,
Okay.
it's coming. And so that was the fun part, right? The Roth. That's the I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
do. And oftentimes it's fun to talk about I'm gonna code
Uh-huh.
an app. I'm gonna start an organization that's gonna help puppies not get, euthanized
Right.
or whatever. It feels good. Now comes the hard part. That's the IRA. And that's in day number 1 or the new
Mm-hmm.
week is ideation. What's keystroke 1? What is prototype number 1? What is phone call 1? What is
Right.
connection 1? And then I give everybody 2 weeks, which this is the critical thing. If you've done a Genius Hour, I see, and I'm going to come across arrogantly, I see people say, this year my Genius Hour product is, this year? This year? This week, bro. Maybe, like I give it 2 weeks.
Okay.
I give it 2 weeks because in those 2 weeks, because they were going to, because when I first started this class, I'd give them way long, and then they'd
Right.
BS me for like 4 or 5 weeks, and then they'd admit
Okay.
it wasn't working. So after 2 weeks, they go, this isn't working. And short time frames, one, it gives you better tight feedback loops, and number 2, like they can't BS their way through it. Like you write
Yeah.
goals
Yeah.
down. So then that's the ideation, and then the RNA is reflect and adjust. Every 2 weeks, give me your podcast. Every 2 weeks, give me your blog. And the most time-consuming thing is they turn that into the public. What they're really doing is interviewing me every 2 weeks, which is
Yeah.
time-consuming. That's why I like it if they're in groups
Right.
of 2 and 3. But they reflect, and then so I even tell them, like, don't BS me. Tell me what's working. Like, don't tell me what's great. What are you struggling with? How can I help? I don't even
This
care about the grade. I want you to
this
reflect on it and then just go ahead. Sorry.
right. No. I want to make sure I'm understanding the timeline. This Roth IRA stuff, this is not happening in that first 7 weeks. This is now we're into the open source learning section.
No. We get to understand that flow.
So you're teaching them you're teaching them about the Roth IRA flow.
I'm teaching them how the workflow is.
Okay.
Eventually, we model the behavior. We have a very tight all-class project,
gotcha.
which just to
So
model
that
it.
they can okay. Because the idea here, once you get to sort of the end of this first chunk of time, is that they all leave this direct instruction period understanding that they're going to be expected to sort of, how do you phrase it? They have to solve a problem in the world. They've got to be choosing some sort of a major project. Like, how is it that they
Oh, I'm so
go
glad you're
from,
segueing this.
you see what I'm
Yes.
saying? Like, how do they
So,
go from coming into the class to understanding what exactly they're going to be doing?
Well, that's where they're scared.
Okay.
Matter of fact, we joke that they have this kind of look on their face in like September, like, what am I going to choose in innovation class to work on? And then normally by November, they're saying, what am I going to limit myself to in innovation class? Like they start falling in love with problems.
Okay.
So we observe. When you hear people say, you know what sucks? Their ears are going, what? There's money to be made. There's problems to be solved. And so they become active searchers of problem solving. And so that's why, like, pick your lane. If you're really into social justice, look around. What can you do to fix it? And don't go to a protest and that's it. Stop it. What are you going to do? Yeah. If your thing is, animal cruelty, what are you going to do? If your thing is making money, what are you going to do? And that gets into my rule of thirds. This is my favorite thing.
Okay.
Rule of thirds is like when they're submitting their proposal to me, because I don't just let them do anything. I have to take a look and go, okay. And even if it's a bad idea, sometimes I let them as long as they can prove the rule of thirds. Rule number 1, are you passionate about it? That's where most Genius Hours just go. Are you passionate about it? Okay, great. That's easy. That one's easy.
Yeah.
Number 2, what's your skills acquisition on this?
Okay.
And then number 3, who is it benefiting other than you? Because I don't care if you're successful. I want you to be empowering others. So, like, one of the things that truly shook me in my core years ago when I did read Lynchpin by Seth Godin, and this is why I have this section in there early in the year, is that he said education can come down to 2 things: solving interesting problems and leadership.
Okay.
And in those 2 things, that's my rule of thirds, basically.
Okay.
And so, case in point, like last year, I had a student come up to me and he says, "Hey, Wettrick," he submitted this portfolio and he's like, "I want to learn how to day trade, like really good."
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's go over the rule of thirds. He's rolling his eyes. He's like, "Okay, here we go." I'm like, "Are you passionate about it?" He's like, "Bro, I'm making money. I want to make money." I'm like, "Okay." Skills acquisition. He's like, "Are you kidding? Holds, puts, options. I mean, I don't know about this stuff, commodities market, but it's going to be fun to learn." I'm like, "Okay." Rule number 3, who's it benefiting other than you? I mean, I want to make money, Wettrick. I said, "Well, I'm not going to approve it." And by forcing him to go, okay. And then his eyes light up. He's like, "Okay, how about I have a stock club during academic lab? As I learn, I can also teach some of my other students and we can like pool our money and do a stock portfolio and see if we can like make money." Which turns out you really can't pool money in school. But anyway, simulated money they can. But he did a rule of thirds and it just worked. And so I think that a rule of thirds is good for every Genius Hour.
Yeah.
It's good practice. Passion, skills, who's it helping?
Did you approve it?
Yeah. After he told me he was going to do a club.
Right. He's going to teach other people how to do it. And then it met that last third.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take a quick break to thank this episode's other sponsor, PeerGrade. PeerGrade is a platform that makes it easy to facilitate peer review in your classroom. Students review each other's work, while PeerGrade takes care of anonymously assigning reviewers and delivering all the relevant insights to teachers. With PeerGrade, students learn to think critically and take ownership of their learning. They also learn to write kind and useful feedback for their peers. PeerGrade is free to use for teachers and students. To learn more, visit cultofpedagogy.com/peergrade. Now let's get back to the interview. I'm gonna recap a little bit, make sure I'm understanding this. Okay, so the class starts. It sounds like the kids, because they've heard about it through word of mouth, I guess, they know that in this class they're going to be expected to have some sort of a project. But what if somebody was starting this brand new? How would they introduce this idea to students of like, because they would say, "What is this class? Why would I take it? What are we doing?"
Are you talking how do you introduce the class or how do you introduce a Genius Hour?
Well, I'm imagine we're talking about a high school teacher who wants to do this in their school. Because at this point, you've been doing it for so long that kids come to you already thinking about what am I going to do for the innovation class? Because it's not a new thing anymore. But if it's brand new, like what,
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
The first thing you're going to have to do is battle the administration.
Of course.
Although I know a lot of it's superintendents and the principal. Wait, and you may even have to like petition the state. I mean, like the first year I did this, there was such a vague title in Indiana that I was like, "That's vague enough. I can work with it." And then eventually I wrote my own.
Okay.
So like step number one is seeing what title it could fit under. Step number two is working with, I would, like anything, like anything in what we do is I prototype small.
Uh-huh.
So I wouldn't say we're doing this school wide. I'd start with a class of 20,
Right. This is just one
right?
period a day.
And yep.
Okay.
And if you really want to melt my heart, I mean, you want to make my day, make it an alternative class.
What do you mean by alternative?
Freaking blow your
You
mind.
mean alternative as in
Bad
the kids
kids.
that, right, of course.
Bad
Yeah.
kids.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. They totally will kick. Anyway, yeah. So, like, round them up. And even if you want to rally the troops, you're like, because if you let them think that it's partly their idea, now they own it.
Okay. Okay.
Because that's what I like when I work with elementaries. That's what I'll do. I'll like instruct some teachers. I'm like, allow them to think it's their idea, or blame me. So they'll walk into class like, well, I just met this little short, enthusiastic guy, Mr. Wettrick, and he was saying that I should give you like 30 minutes on a Friday to like. He said I should let you guys play Minecraft. Isn't that dumb? And watch them just go nuts.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, it's a great idea. Well, it's not a good idea. What educational things could come out of Minecraft? And they'll start telling you all
Play
the
devil's
things
advocate
educational
with
that
the
come out of
kids, you
Minecraft.
mean? You're talking about talking to the kids.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So if you can talk the administrators into letting you give this a shot anyway, then
Yes.
then the idea is to actually explain to the kids, what is it that I'm actually expecting from you in this class? What is this class?
And could you imagine just rounding up some, like okay, like first of all, the people that listen to your podcast are that teacher anyway,
Yeah.
right? That's why they're listening to you. They're that teacher. Otherwise, they wouldn't be giving a
Right.
darn, on professional development. So that teacher starts having a conversation of like a very Seth Godin. So, okay, small plug for my podcast. When I interviewed Seth, he just kept going back at what is the purpose of education? Why are you here?
Right.
Have that conversation with your kids. Instinctively, they'll start going and they'll start proving why there should be an innovation class. And so the kids that really light it on fire. So if you have, let's just say you have 6 classes, right? Of those 6 classes, you're probably going to have 2 to 5 kids that really own it. There's your 20.
Okay. I got
There's
you.
your 20. And you secretly, not secretly, be like, hey, I really liked your answers. I'm thinking about, based on some of the things you said, I've got this crazy idea. What do you
I
think?
gotcha.
Now, those kids were like, yeah. And it was my idea. I mean, there's like this old Saturday Night Live skit of the guy that like started the wave at a football game. And every time it went around, he kept telling people, hey, that was me. And you see everybody standing up and saying, that was me. And they'll feel just as
Right.
proud. Like, hey, you see this class? Yeah. I killed this class discussion. And then, of course, the other kid's like, dude, I was in period 5. And she told the same thing to me. But
So you round up your early adopters, basically. You're really enthusiastic, and that's who you
Absolutely.
launch this thing with. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're already fired up, and then once they're there, and then inevitably, even though these are the fired up early adopter kids, at some point somebody's going to say, "What do we actually get a grade on here?" Because this is still a class. And so then you say to them, like, your ultimate goal here is to, of course, figure out something you're passionate about, the rule of thirds, all of that. But like, what is the end product? Is it the task itself? Like each kid are going to decide what your task is?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
and you let them know that, just be honest with them. Like, I was dreaming when I wrote this. Forgive me if I go too fast.
There it is.
There it is.
I was waiting
But
for it.
like, thank you. I was keep you waiting. And the waiting is the hardest part.
Oh
Rest
my
in peace,
God.
Tom Petty. At least we're having fun. So
Yes, okay.
anyway, I've been waiting for this because Jennifer, I know you well enough, yet we don't really know each other well enough.
Yeah.
That after this podcast, we're totally bros.
Oh, thank
Right?
you.
Yeah.
That's a huge
Yeah.
honor to be a bro with you. So thanks.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. As long as yeah. I'm glad you weren't offended. Like, I'm not a bro.
No.
Anyway. All right. So, but yeah, I'd let them like we're making this up as we go along. Isn't this fun?
Yeah.
Because I have changed my grading system 7 times because I'm working what works best for my students. And ultimately, it's how can I hold you accountable to the things that you said you're going to do?
Okay. So,
Like, I think that everybody should have this class. The hell, I work with, sorry, language. I work with teachers and stuff that they're like, we should have this as professional development. You're darn straight you
yeah.
should.
Yep. I've actually just recently seen murmurs of this, of teachers doing Genius Hour types of things. So that's hopefully on its way. So okay, but if you've reiterated your grading system that many times, I would guess that looking back on the first couple of years, you could point to certain things that you're like, that is definitely a don't.
Too many.
I mean, in terms
Too
of just the
many.
grading, in terms of just the grading and accountability.
Absolutely. Yeah, because what the pinnacle of irony is that when I first got started, I had this compliance-based system
Okay.
and they hacked it. I'm
Okay.
like, I had this like formula
Hmm.
that like the amount of, because in the beginning when my principal was like, what standards are you covering? And, like, I've got the most supportive principal and superintendent in the world, but in the beginning it was like, what standards are you hitting? And I would tell them they're identifying it.
Hmm.
So like when a kid says I want to write an app, I'm like, great, what three, like knock out three standards,
Okay.
and they're taking ownership of their education. So I used to have this formula that I'm like, okay, depending on how many weeks you think it's going to take and how many standards you're knocking out, it's going to be. And I said you had to have 100 points by the end of the semester. And they would even like they would tell me in their proposal how much they thought it was going to be worth. Well, like they set me into a trap because they were like in some cases BSing their way through it because they're like, okay, if I have to comply to this like arbitrary 100. Now I did like the art of negotiation. And because it was like, I deserve 60 points for this 4-week project, and I'm like, you deserve a 20. I'll see your 20, and I'll have and we like did this dance, and that was a great skill. Like I still kind of miss it,
Yeah.
but I had to realize that as much as I like, don't believe in like a lot of compliance stuff, but I will say this: here's the catch-22. For you to have this work, the early years, it will be a lot of failure, like anything in innovation. But the weird thing is, especially past fifth grade, this idea is going to be so foreign to them that they'll still feel like you have to give me an A through an F. You have to give me. So this is kind of that gradual release of responsibility kind of thing. So even if in the first semester you want to have a little bit more of a traditional, you can start moving away from it. If you start off loosey goosey, it's that whole, hey man, I want you to learn. It's all about the learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. I need an A.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
you can always loosen up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can start it a little bit more traditional, and you would just base that on participation and reflections and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm heavily on. Well, heck, I'm to the point now where and I'm not. Well, I am bragging. The class is so awesome now, where I'm basing it off of the reflections, and then really the feedback they're giving to me in person. And I'm not going to say like the beginning it was 20-80, 20% of the kids got it, 80% didn't. Now I'm at about 80-20 or 85-15,
Yeah.
where I still get occasionally a couple of kids that are like, look, my dad said I should take this class because, he heard about it. I don't know what I want to do. I just want to be told what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's fine.
Uh-huh.
Like, there's some people that just don't. But my thing that I wanted to rectify for the sins of the past is I wanted this class to be for those kids that are like, just leave me alone so I can work on my stuff.
Yeah.
And then to be supported. The kid that likes to be told to sit down and shut your mouth and work on and memorize this, I mean, they don't like it, and that's fine.
Right.
Like the rest of this, there's a lot of things there for them in school to do. It breaks my heart, but this class is not for everybody. I'd like it for it to be everybody, but it's not for
Well,
everybody.
I think some people they're not there mentally yet. And for somebody to be given this opportunity like this when they've never had anything like this before and they're 17 years old, they've got some neural pathways that are already getting, pretty solid. So,
Yeah. Well, and the social pressure, like the social, I wonder if Ava's up. My own daughter
yeah.
was petrified. Like, so I'm living a dream. I wanted my oldest daughter in this class in the worst way. And so she's a junior, and so she took the class. And there was like this social pressure of she's in the innovation class, and we've got a pretty good footprint.
Yeah.
And so there was this paralyzing pressure that I need to go out and change the world. And I'm like, no, you don't, Ava. You need to go out and find some opportunities. Everything will even itself out.
Hey, I got a question really quick because this is sort of along the same
Yeah.
lines. The 2 week thing, you said you're looking at 2 week sort of cycles.
Yeah.
So, do you have some kids that kind of like bip and bop around all year to different things, and then others who are on a
Yep.
very steady sort of path of like, here's another incremental goal, here's another incremental goal, and they stay
Yes.
focused on the same thing?
Yes. And here I'll tell you the median. So I've most projects that come out of the so we start like August 1st.
Uh-huh.
We've got this balanced calendar
Uh-huh.
thing. So August, September, it's the class, and then I kind of around October give them their first project. I'd say there's like a 95% turnover on that first project. What seemed like a good idea at the time seemed like a good idea.
I gotcha.
And then some students never get past that. They keep, like you said, hopping and
Uh-huh.
popping in and out of just 2 week projects. And I let them. Like, how many of us changed our major in college? Answer: almost all of us.
Right.
So for them to discover what they can't, like, dude, I thought I was gonna like this. This is
Yeah.
terrible. Awesome.
Right. Right.
Like, I'm excited about that. And then we get some kids that think like, and I've only had one student in my 7 years that knew exactly what he wanted to do at the beginning of the year, and he stuck with it all year. But by giving it that 2 week, okay, what do you think? It also allows them to like plan out because our proposal form, I even have like, what's your 1 year, 6 month, semester, 3 week, 2 week, 1 week, what are you doing today goal? So like everything shifts a lot of times after 2 weeks. What they thought was only going to take, 2 weeks is going to take them 5, or what they thought was going to take them 2 weeks, they got done in a
Yeah.
day. And these are all really great skills in life. So I don't beat them up for it if they didn't hit their mark, as long as they have a really good reason of why they didn't hit their
Right.
mark. If their reason is I was talking to a guy or I was doing stuff, well, now we've got some
Okay,
problems.
you know what? I've realized that now we've been talking about all of this in the abstract. We're recording this in October. So you've got a group right now that is sort of in the thick of this. I'm imagining you've got some that are well on their way to figuring out like a big main thing for the year, and others who are still really kind of searching. So could you give me maybe an example of two different kids, and one that's, because I think maybe for people who this is still pretty new for, if they could hear examples of what types of projects and proposals these kids are
Absolutely.
doing, it would be a quicker path to actually being able to start doing something like this. So maybe one that's really doing well and one that's really struggling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I know my students will listen to this, so know that Mr. Wettrick loves you, even though I said some of these are bad ideas. Um, I'll start off. I'll start off with like one that's going to rock people's world. So, um, actually, a former student of mine kind of brought me out to Ghana
Oh, wow.
like 3 years ago, and things went well, and we ended up buying land to eventually do a school, and things move on Ghanaian time. And long story made short, it hasn't really gone anywhere. And so two of my students got in touch with this guy named Kobe, who was there in Africa, and then they got a hold of the former student Pete Freeman, and he's like, "Hey, man," because like Pete, he's at Notre Dame on full scholarship because he's amazing and awesome. Like he got 26,000 kids healthcare
Wow.
because he worked with the government and an NGO. I mean, this kid is a world changer. So, like, my two students, both of them named Luke, were like, "Hey, whatever happened to you guys opening up that school of innovation?" He's like, "Well, right now I'm fulfilling my university and my NGO responsibilities, but here's the guy." And so they start working with this guy, Kobe. And at first they thought they were going to, well, first of all, to build a school in Ghana is not a lot of money, or at least in a
Right,
village,
right.
right? So this isn't a school with like a gymnasium and a library. This is something that's going to hold
Got it.
100 kids. So they look at the budget and think, I can do this. And they start looking at sustainable things that they could sell, et cetera, et cetera. And then they've had some ideas that weren't good, and then they whittled away, and they're almost fully funded. And they're not going to turn over money. They're like, one of them's going to
Oh
live
my
in Ghana.
gosh.
He graduates early. He graduates in Luke Johnston graduates in December, and so January 1, he's going to live
Holy
out
cow.
there. The other Luke Rex, is doing all the paperwork and going through the NGO process
Oh my gosh.
because they have an hour and a half every other day. And really, when I say they have an hour and a half every other day to work on this, they work on it every
Of
day.
course. This is just
So
the,
that's
yeah.
something that's like, oh yeah, I mean, like neither of them, and one of them is definitely not going to go to college because he doesn't want to. Has good enough grades to, just doesn't want to. And the other one is on the fence whether he wants to. But both of them are like, this is really cool. It's going to, because they believe in the class so much. The school is going to be based heavily on like our methods.
Right.
So they're going to get kids in just outside of Cape Coast. So it's not like a CRA. It's not like a Western city. It's pretty rural. That's actually the reason why we did the school. They had to walk 2 hours to the nearest
Oh my
school.
goodness.
So that's like a shining example of dang.
Right.
And then like another one was here's a good idea going nowhere. And I say this lovingly. So these kids were like, we started out like, what do you really like? Well, I like running. I like my cross country team. I'm like, what could you do with the cross country team? And long story made short, we started kicking around ideas, and Rick and Dick Hoyt came up, right? Rick and Dick Hoyt, if you ever want to cry hysterically, he is a older gentleman that pushes and pulls, and he does triathlons with his son, and his son is completely paralyzed. And he has got these like designed running wheelchairs, and they're like, we're going to do that. And it seemed like a great idea until you start looking at the price of these. And so it went from and then we're like, okay, they're $12,000 a chair. And we were going to do this this Thanksgiving Day dinner dash. And so like little by little, we kept running into, we can't. Well, they're like, well, we're going to make our own. No, we're not. There's things called OSHA and all these federal regulations. And so long story made short, like the idea at first just went nowhere. And so they end up working with an organization that already has something like this and small scaling it and seeing how it goes.
Right.
Actually, the beginning is like, we're going to have our own race. No, you're not. Why? If your whole point was to work with unable-bodied athletes and have them paired up with able-bodied athletes, that's in some ways that's called best buddies, right? And so they're like, okay, why reinvent the wheel? And so they just kept whittling away until they finally found their what Silicon Valley calls the MVP, the minimum viable product. So that was a good idea of a great idea. Keep scaled back.
Yes.
Interesting. And then there's always those like, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to build an app.
Right.
No, you're not.
Right.
It's emotion talking.
Okay.
It's like the last night of church camp. Last night of church camp, you gather around the fire. I'm going to write you every week.
Right.
We're going to be best friends. I'm going to change this time. No, you're not. Emotions talking. So we get a lot of these huge, great, big ideas, and I will allow them a couple of weeks to figure it out of what they're up against. And most of the time, they learn how to either put things in its proper place, or a couple of them look at it and go, okay, so what I need to do is, like Hunter, ironically enough, my co-founder of my company, he's like, I'm going to design an app I designed a game and put it on the Play Store. And he did it. And I thought it wasn't going to work, and it did. But that would I say is easily the number one thing. Like they have these great big, I'm going to cure cancer.
Right.
Yeah.
And so part of your job is to help them understand that you don't just do that in a semester or whatever. It's to help them understand that there are smaller things that they could do that would make an actual contribution.
And this sounds so awful, but get them to fail as fast as they can.
Yeah.
I'm going to cure cancer. Okay, go do it. A week later. Yeah, I didn't know what I was up against. Great. I mean, like, and I'm always in favor of them learning, like the 2-week feedback. If they can learn it in a week, I'm like, great, scratch that off your list.
So you're relaying these conversations as if you just immediately reject these ideas, but sometimes you let them go ahead and give the wild idea a try, and then they come back and realize they.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's kind of like we have a week where we focus on social media training, and we have like what's a good profile, all this other stuff like LinkedIn, all these other things. So, the kid's like, I'm going to get feedback from Andrew Luck. I'm like, yeah, go ahead. Like, it's not going to happen,
Right.
but I want them to think that maybe it could. And then they figure out tactics. Oh man, they figured out tactics. The people we've talked to in class are ridiculous. because they found ways to get to
Like,
them.
drop some names. I know you interviewed Gary Vaynerchuk for your podcast, so I'm assuming he talked to the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our first, so like, again, these are big names to me.
Yeah.
But Naveen Jain, Tim Ferriss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet a lot of
Let's
teachers
see
don't
who are.
know a lot of these names because they may not be.
Ironically, yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually why I started my
Mm-hmm.
podcast. That's exactly why. Like Tim Ferriss spent 2 hours with our class, which is insane because I
Wow.
think for him to speak to a group, it's like $100,000. But I emailed people like, hey, does anybody want to come down here and do a hangout with Tim Ferriss? And I was like, who's Tim Ferriss?
Yeah.
And I was like, all these people that were my, I don't say idols, the people I looked up to were entrepreneurs, and that's exactly why I started my wacky podcast. I think these people are awesome and amazing.
Do you have any type of a sort of download or a book or something that would walk a teacher through these steps, or do they kind of
Yep.
have to just fiddle around? Okay, which of your things does that?
Go to startitupinnovation.com. There's a
Mm-hmm.
couple of courses. And the other thing that I really, really recommend people do is that I record from the classroom every day, which Gary's the one that put me up to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do 3 to 4 minute videos from the classroom because I don't want to sit there and be like a talking head. There's a lot
Yeah.
of people saying out, hey, be innovative. What does that mean? Well, you'll meet my kids.
Yeah.
So every day I have little tips, suggestions, and that was matter of fact, the only day I haven't done them is now since we're on fall break. So you can go back from August 1 through last week and see exactly what we do. And then you obviously will know what we worked on that week because I talk about it.
This
So
is
that's
your
kind of a
YouTube
nice
channel.
resource. Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
And
actually, it is my YouTube channel. That doesn't seem to get as much traction. Facebook.com/startedup gets a lot
Okay.
more traction.
so all this stuff is basically under the umbrella of Start Ed Up, which is the name of your
Yep.
podcast, and you've got
Yep.
the website now with that name also, right?
Start Ed Up Innovation. Somebody
Okay.
bought it and then tried to sell it to me for a lot.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I
That
know.
was their genius hour project. They just
Yeah.
buy domain names.
I was, same thing happened to me. I was in the Netherlands and I did a cool speaking thing there for like 2.5 weeks. And I met with a group. They were like, hey, we'd like to represent you to be out here and speak more in the Netherlands. I'm like, awesome. They're like, can we find more about Don Wettrick at donwettrick.com? I'm like, oh, no, that's not my website. They purchased the domain name in front of me. And then when I got back, they offered to sell it to me.
Oh my God.
I just want to be nice. How was that? Right in front of me. They're like, well, we bought it now. Anyway, I'm learning, Jennifer.
Okay. Well, so what I'm going to do for people listening is I'm going to get all the URLs for everything so that people can come and find all of your stuff. And so they can just come to my site, to the podcast page. And
Yeah.
they'll
There's
find
big,
everything.
big news that I can only allude to a little bit.
Okay.
But we've got a really special thing going with Twitch. And a lot of people are going, I don't know what Twitch is. And
course.
that's okay. You will later. And
Okay.
that's all I can say for right now. But it's special.
Okay. Well, they'll good. Maybe by the time they listen, this is coming out in a couple more weeks. So maybe by that time they'll say, I know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Don, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I love your enthusiasm, and I hope that this gets more people to try this. I'm guessing there are probably going to be questions over on my site from people, and can I have you come over and answer them if I can't?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And for more pop culture references, go to @DonWettrick on Twitter, where I will at least shout out to Duran Duran. I never got around to you, so I'm sorry.
Aw, did you have one like on deck, ready to go?
No, I mean, but
No.
they were, that's kind of my go-to.
Well, okay.
kind of a jam.
Wow. All right.
I liked Rio. So there it is. Seven the Ragged Tiger was good too, but sorry, my 45-year-oldness is showing. I shall stop.
Thank you so much.
And Jennifer, I will also say this before we wrap up.
Yeah.
you do such a great service to a lot of educators, and I love it because you're not resting on your laurels. You're putting out stuff, and you're making people rethink a lot of practice. So even when I was talking the other day, there was a lady in the teacher's lounge, and she was talking about some podcast, and I was like, "Oh, are you listening to my podcast?" And she's like, "No, but I am listening to Cult of Pedagogy." I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right, well, I have one too." Anyway, enjoy your chicken tetrazzini, and talk to you later.
For links to all the resources mentioned in this episode, visit cultofpedagogy.com, go to podcasts, and click on episode 83. To get weekly updates on all my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day. This podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. To learn more, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.